Hi, I'm Bethany with Shabby Fabrics, and today I'm going to walk you through a quick tutorial on how to make the crazy Christmas tree table runner, as you see behind me. This is from Cut Loose Press, and we've made this available to you in a limited number of kits. This is Santa's Tree Farm by Moda is the fabric line. Super cute. This is pre-cut friendly, so if you have some layer cakes you've been trying to use up and you want to use your own fabric, this calls for 10-inch squares for the prints that you see here in red and green. Let's get right into it. All right, so this project features the Spiderweb ruler by Creative Grids. I love this ruler. We're going to use it in a couple different projects coming up. It makes that traditional spiderweb block in a few different sizes, and it's going to be used a few times in this project here. And as you can see, I've got a couple different lines running through, a vertical line, some mitered lines here for the different spiderweb shapes. I am going to line this up on the center of my block at the 10-inch line. Without marking on my block itself, I want to find the very center of this, so I like to just fold this in half and finger press it just a little bit at the top and bottom. There'll be a little bit of a crease in there, and then I can lay this center line of my ruler right on that crease. And then we're going to pull this down until that 10-inch line runs across the bottom. And you see that little black triangle should line up right at the top. And then using my spinning mat, I'm going to cut on both angled edges here. And this will give us the wedge of our Christmas tree. Okay. So these will be set aside, these excess pieces here. We're actually going to cut the tree trunks that you see from some of this fabric here, and then we'll repeat this for all of our tree fabrics. I think we have 8 or 10 different fabrics for the trees. Okay, so once we have all these cut out here, we're going to want to cut our backgrounds, and the pattern calls for an 11 by 14 inch piece of fabric here for the background. We're going to cut 3 inches off of this to make this 11 by 11. I've got 2 fabrics here, so I'm just going to layer these to get these cuts done quicker. This 11 by 3 inch cut is generous. We are going to be cutting that down in a later step, so you don't have to be super on the money with this. We just got to get that out of the way to get our 11-inch square. If we can set that aside for later use. And then just like we did previously, we're going to use the spiderweb ruler here. And this one, this time when we line up on that 10-inch line, our cut's gonna exceed past the tip of this ruler. So again, I want to find the center of my fabric. I'll finger press that real quick. Ooh, 10-inch line is what we're going for here. I did that a few times where I cut at the very bottom, thinking that I wanted to line up with the top of the ruler here. So learn from my mistakes. Don't do them like I do them. We're going to do it right the first time. So this first cut seems a little scary, but I'm just going to extend past and get that as straight as possible. We're going to be kind of trimming these blocks down, so there will be a bit of like trimming done. If that's not perfectly straight, it's not going to ruin the project or anything. I'm going to rotate this, and then we'll cut straight from the point off the edge of the ruler here. Okay. So your middle of your white fabric, this will be set aside and used later to make the background of our whole quilt here, but we've just cut the sides here. So when we go to sew our sides on, you can see I've got the 2 side pieces. One's got that little corner cut off, and I made this a couple times to make a few samples, and I ended up lining my fabric up, kind of at the point where those meet, and sewing a 1/4 inch. And then I realized at the bottom of my block, was kind of cutting off a lot of fabric. I want to use as much of this white fabric as possible. So when I go to line this up, I'm actually going to be lining up the bottom down here. My little triangle should extend a 1/4 inch past the white fabric. And also this whole thing with the 1/4 inch, and we'll have a little bit hanging over at the top, and that's just fine. I want to get this square from the bottom rather than the top, because these will overlap and get there eventually. All right, and I'll meet you at the machine with that 1/4 inch seam on this. Okay, let me reference my pattern here. It just says press seams to one side, so I am going to press my tree towards itself. So I always like to press my fabric towards the dark side so it doesn't peek through the light fabric. Okay. And then we've got this little bit overhanging here. If you can see, the bottom lines up just perfectly. Top, we're going to trim off this little overhanging portion so that when we go to sew this bit on, it's not running into like our seam guide or messing up our 1/4 inch. So this is super easy. We're going to line up our ruler right along the edge of that green fabric and just trim that off. Okay. So again, this one should, when we line this up, overlap a 1/4 inch at the top and then show a 1/4 inch of the green at the bottom, and it looks like it's doing just that. So I'll get this pinned and sew this seam as well. And then you would repeat the step for all, I think, 8 of your tree backgrounds. So there'll be 4 reds and 4 greens, and this would be identical for all 4 of them. Okay, with that seam sewn, I'm going to remove my pins here. And then this one kind of naturally wants to fold back, and it would show through possibly on the front. So I'm going to force this seam kind of in on itself. I'll press towards the green or towards the dark fabric again. All right, I'm going to repeat this exact same steps here for my red fabric with the secondary white background I have. I'll get this on off camera and I'll meet you back here for the next steps. All right, so when you are making this yourself, you're going to have a stack of 4 reds, 4 greens, and the next step is to cut these in a few different places to get our little wonky, crazy Christmas tree wedges here. We are going to grab a straight edge. I like a friction pin so I can mark and have this iron off. And the pattern will give you a few different places to mark along the edge. It'll be different for your stack of reds and your stack of greens. That's what gives us all of the variety in the wedges here. Let's just start here. And then I don't want to give the whole pattern away, so these measurements will be in the pattern. That pattern will be in your kit. Fun fact, the kit does include your backing, which is not something that we're always able to do, but we thought it was a good fit on this one. So that will be in your kit. I'm gonna mark my 3 little marks here, come to the other side, and then we're just gonna take our straight edge and use those lines as a guide for where we'll cut across. So you're gonna cut your whole stack. You can do it one at a time or the whole stack at one time. This is crazy Christmas trees, not super sane and perfect Christmas trees. So you don't have to have this really perfect. The pattern is very generous in what it allows you to kind of get away with. So we'll cut these all the way through. I've actually got a stack here already cut of my green and my red, so I want to show you what those look like. So we've got a couple different shapes here. It looks like our tops are identical, but everything else is running a little bit different here. And when we go to assemble our Christmas trees, okay, we're gonna grab one of each. We'll go back and forth and layer this here. You might wanna skip your bottom red and go to this one. You might think this is how that'll fit, but we are actually gonna use 4 of each piece across the whole project here. And then you will use, how do I say it? One of each fabric will be in each Christmas tree. So there'll be 4 different trees. They will each be completely different from each other, but they will all have one fabric repeating once in there. And then there is a peculiar little step on, I believe, the reds here. It tells us in the pattern that we're gonna trim down one of the sections. I believe it's the point sections. We're gonna trim off the points so that we don't have 2 points exactly. Okay, so I'm continuing to lay this out. I have mixed up some of my fabrics. And then I get to my last point here. I've used the candy canes, I've used the stars. I have not used the dots. And when I get here, you may notice like, whoa, Bethany, there's a big gap between this point here and this fabric, and I don't see that on the table runner behind me. The pattern does tell you that on all of your green top pieces here, this is, I guess, B1 is the section here, we're gonna cut off a portion of this again to bring this down to about, I believe it's about 1 3/4. So that will trim the tip off and get us the look that we have behind us. So I'm gonna show that to you here. And again, this doesn't need to be perfect. You can do this exactly to 1 3/4 using your ruler here, but it's crazy Christmas trees, so why not cut it a little wonky here? And of course, in showing you that, I did just smush my whole tree that I had laid out here. Okay, we'll get this laid out again. And then when we take this to our machine to sew it, there's no seams to match up. You may see that this one looks like it will match up, but once we get that 1/4 inch seam on both sides, it will overlap, like you see here where the red overhangs the green a little bit. I'm not gonna show that to you. I have one finished here for you, but I do wanna show you how to trim this up. As you can see, none of my seams are matching up. That's what we want. We want this to be a crazy Christmas tree. What I'm gonna do to get this square is I like to line the bottom of the block with a line on my mat, and then I'm gonna square this up based off of that. As you can see, when I was sewing this, I had, different angles hanging off. That is just fine. I wanna get that centered, and then I believe the pattern says to trim this to 9 inches. So I'll get my long ruler, and I like to find maybe the middle of the bottom. Looks like I'll be about a 1/4 inch outside of my lines here. Or sorry, a 1/2 inch. I have plenty there. I'm just gonna measure twice because I have messed up my cuts more than once on this project. 9. It looks just fine, okay. This one, the spinning mat's a little too small for what we're doing, so I'm just gonna gently turn that block around, get it lined up against the straight edge on my mat. And then we are gonna be trimming this block down both directions from the top and the bottom to get this down to 14.5 as well. So you might see here that I'm not cutting, like my fabric is not underneath that whole 9 inches, but that will be trimmed in the next step as well. Okay, so I liked on this quilt to have the point of my Christmas tree kind of at different distances from the edge of the binding. So on this one here, I'm gonna keep this one pretty close to the edge, and then I'll cut down some more of the end of my Christmas tree as well. So I think I'm gonna go maybe just a 1/2 inch from the point on the Christmas tree. I'm wanting to like line up the ruler with the lines on the tree, but I have to go off the lines on the cutting mat or else this will not be the right size. And again, this will be 14.5. So I will be cutting off a nice chunk of the green tree here at the bottom, and that's just fine. All right, that is your block completed here. I do want to walk you through real quick how to make the tree trunk, because I said we were going to use some of the parts of the white or the background fabric that we had cut off. So I'll set this aside. Our tree trunk is going to be cut from the red, and this will be a 1.5 by 2.5 inch rectangle. I think I'm going to cut 1.5, 2.5. Here. Okay. And you'll have 4 of these from one of each red fabric that you have. And then the pattern tells us that with the background fabric, we're going to use the spiderweb ruler again to cut these into some like wedges, and so that our background will also be kind of pieced and wonky. There'll be a bit of play we can have with this. We're going to cut a 3-inch section. And again, I said that this section that we cut off, the 14 by 11 background, was oversized. These are oversized as well. I'm going to keep them oversized until I go to put them in my project because these seams are going to be all on bias, and I want to make sure I sew them very accurately. So I'd rather trim them after I sew rather than get them to the correct size before I sew them and then hope that I get it right in the sewing. So with that 3 by 11 inch strip that we cut off in one of the first steps, we're going to grab the spiderweb ruler again, and then we're going to line up the 6-inch line on the bottom. The 3-inch line should be lined up across the top. And then this doesn't need to be centered any one way or another on here. I like to have kind of a variety of strip sizes, so I get it kind of just a tiny bit off to one side. And I'm going to use the spinning mat to cut these bits, and then all of these pieces will be used up in the background of our quilt. Okay. So for our tree trunk, what we would do is take that straight 90-degree line and line that up with the bottom of the quilt. You can do this completely scrappy or keep these two fabrics the same. These do overhang here, but that's fine. Like I said, I'm going to oversize this and square it up down to the size of this strip, which would be 2.5. Because when I go to sew maybe these diagonal seams, I have to offset them a little bit, and to me it's just easier to trim it up after. So I'll get a couple of these seams sewn for you and show you what that looks like and how I trim that up. These I will press in towards the red. And then obviously you can see this is not going to be long enough for the tree trunk here, so I'm going to sew a couple pieces to the side. And if you are familiar with sewing seams on an angle, we know we're going to line these up. They will overlap each other, like the point of this will overlap by 1/4 inch, and this one will overhang by 1/4 inch. We'll sew that with that 1/4 inch seam allowance as well, and then trim this down to the size we need for our block, which would be 9 inches here. Okay, that last seam is done. Real quick before we add this to our quilt, I'm going to trim this up to 2.5 inches. So I'm going to use the lines on my ruler for that. Perfect. Okay. And then when I go to add this to my block here, I like to center this to the best as I can on my Christmas tree. Again, this is crazy Christmas trees. If you wanted it off to the side a little bit, you absolutely can. You would trim this to 9 inches and then sew it to the bottom of your block. That's your Christmas tree. We're going to have 4 of these in here with a little bit of a stashing in between, sewn the same way we did with joining these two angled pieces here. Thank you so much for joining me today on this tutorial. If you haven't, please be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of these projects. And I'll see you on the next Shabby tutorial.